Ladies and gentlemen, this is kind of the big one. Yes, you've had your Goldfinger anniversary come and go, but now we've got to talk about the man with the golden gun. And I can't think of another person I'd rather talk to about this movie than my good friend Ryan from Analyze This. Mr. Bond, Ryan, welcome back.
It's such a pleasure to be here, David.
It's so good to have you. And by the way, since we're both kind of sartorial style people, I said to Ryan, we got to come styled for this. You look very Roger Moore in this.
Well, thank you. Nothing says Roger Moore like a safari jacket.
I kind of know that. Look at me. And he wears kind of a multiple. He's got that nice white cream one in there, which yours is replicating. He's got that green one when he gets together with good old Sheriff Pepper. So I'm kind of denoting that. But we are here today. Listen, this is not one of those debates like I have with Calvin Dyson where I'm saying, like, do you like it? Do you love it? Is it fair to say that we both like this movie?
Oh, very much so. I'm a big Golden Gun fan, regardless of what we actually might say the quality of the movie is. I enjoy watching it all the time.
So we're going to celebrate it. I mean, this is kind of what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the highlights. You all out there can like rip it apart, and we will get into some of the things that might be slight misses, but we had a mission. And he was game for it. But basically I said to Ryan, I need you to watch the movie. And I'm going to watch the movie. And I even invited my wife, Danielle, to watch the movie. And you know what she said? She said, something, I'm okay. I don't think I need to watch it again. I've seen it before. But that gives you a little bit of the taste of how some people, not just in the Bond community, but some people in the world think about the man with the golden gun. I mean, Ryan, could you say that maybe this is not the most loved Bond movie?
I think it's an underdog Bond movie, despite being simultaneously an underdog movie and an iconic movie. The Golden Gun is one of the most iconic elements of the Bond franchise. People know what the Golden Gun is, if only because of the video games and because of how it's used frequently there as like a one-shot kill object in the game. But like that has a mystique unto itself, but the movie itself doesn't seem to be that beloved in the Bond fandom or the like broader culture.
I agree, and we'll break it apart. But I mean, first of all, we have to start, to me, with almost like the opening scene, because the opening scene introduces us wonderfully to the fact that the title character, much like Goldfinger, is sort of at the center of why I think I love this film so much. I mean, we've got to talk about Scaramanga.
Sure.
Literally, the man with the golden gun. What do you think about him as a character?
I think he's really terrific. You don't get much better than Christopher Lee as far as screen villains go. And not every Bond villain role is written in a way that gives an actor just room to play,
Right.
But Christopher Lee gets a lot of room in this movie to just be awesome. And this is a Bond villain that more so that I think really any other really leans into the idea that this villain is the mirror of Bond in the sense that this is a villain with like a hedonistic streak. He lives on a glamorous island. He's introduced on the beach with a beautiful woman. Enjoying champagne. It's like, it is the perfect, like, this villain is the mirror of James Bond kind of like intro shot within a few moments of this movie.
I think Scaramanga puts it best, and what you're saying is he raises his glass at one point and says, "We are the best. We are one of a kind." It's like the whole idea that finally in a movie, I mean, even if you go back into the Connery movies, you finally have an equal to Bond. And like you're saying, his proclivities, his behaviors, the way he goes about his life, even his appreciation that death is at the corner of every street, and yet he accepts it and embraces it. Where I think I love him in a sense, even maybe so more than Bond in this movie, is he's got this wonderful sardonic humor.
Yeah.
He's got this relationship with Knick Knack. The whole movie, by the way, I was thinking about a theme and a summation, because I know, that this is how Analyze This, Mr. Bond, his channel, it goes over themes, is cat and mouse. It's this, I'm going to chase you, you're going to chase me. And it is like a Tom and Jerry type moment.
Sure.
Where they're kind of changing roles. But even the way he dresses, and we got to talk about the sartorial, like that whole jumpsuit at the beginning, he's just kind of has a joie de vivre that Bond has with his style.
He really does. It's a little bit more ostentatious than Bond would ever go with his
Totally.
like gold accents, but he's so stylish. And it's interesting that you bring up Knick Knack, because this it just occurred to me right now. I've never thought about this before, but his relationship with Knick-Knack is like they're the first villain and henchman pairing that seem like they're actually like just good friends and they enjoy hanging out together. And
They take the Mickey out of each other, and it's
they're just having like continual games with one another,
Yes.
violent games, but
Yeah.
like but games with one another and kind of like trying to one up each other. And it kind of gives the villain a unique aura. Bond gets kind of pulled into the mission by happenstance. Bond isn't really like at the center of this story. The villain is kind of like doing his own thing. So when Bond is kind of like interrupting the mission, he's kind of like just messing up Scaramanga's like nice life trajectory.
that's it. Yeah.
Right. And the two of them kind of like get into this like friendly rivalry. Scaramanga loves Bond.
Oh yeah.
And,
oh yeah.
and that's established from the outset that there's kind of like, I don't know, it's a unique dynamic in the sense that like the villain and the henchman are getting along, and the villain also really just kind of enjoys James Bond, which is unusual.
He sees him as the pinnacle. I mean, you know,
Right.
when you think about, we also talk about emulation marketing. You know, the whole idea is if we wear this top from Oliver Brown or his from Anthony Sinclair, someone might go, you know something, I liked Ryan in that outfit, I'm going to buy that jacket. It's the same thing with Scaramanga and Bond. He emulates and respects Bond. If anything, it's almost like a little brother to a big brother type of emulation, whereas Bond is sickened by that. He's like, you know, we're nothing of a kind, and I'm going to do this. But deep down, I think Bond knows he's looking at a reflection of a darker self.
I think so, very much so. And I that's an idea that the series continues to play with. You know, you see it with 006, you see it with Silva. Like this kind of like we're mirrors of each other trope builds from here. But like this is one case where it feels like Christopher Lee really has the gravitas to actually say that he can stand across from Bond and be like, yeah, when he says we are the best, it doesn't feel like posturing. This is a guy who feels like he's a really accomplished foe. And that polarity between the two of them gives the film a lot of oomph, even when the story is kind of like just meandering
Yes.
about.
Wow, that's a great point, because there was a note that I made on my pad, and believe it or not, I had a pad when I was watching this, that I wrote Spackle. And what I meant by Spackle is like when you have a little hole in the wall, and for those of you across the seas, you know, you fill it in. There's a lot of spackle in this moment, in this movie. And I think that Christopher Lee, you know, Saruman and Count Dooku, the bigness that he brings to it, you're so blown back by it. You're so in your seat going through this saying, what is he going to do next? That you tend to ignore the fact that there is wires and there's craziness and bombastic things that make absolutely no sense, to the point where there was a moment where I said to myself, you know something, David, you're watching a James Bond fantasy. This is not Casino Royale, where he's running through a wall and it's realistic and you feel for him. This is a fantasy. So these types of bombastic characters like Christopher Lee are part of the fantasy. But I have to move on because we may get into a little bit more of a reality when we talk about the Bond girls.
The Bond girls.
Right? We've got Maud Adams, we got Britt Eklund.
Yes.
Two very different characters in the story. But talk to me about your point of view on these.
So I love Britt Eklund. I love Maud Adams. I think they're both very striking cinema presences. And in fact,
And by the way, he's going to be seeing them
and
in person.
I will be seeing them in person, so I'm very excited about that.
Not too shabby.
Not too shabby at all. And it's interesting also, if you're a film fan, that like this was kind of this is the other film in which Christopher Lee and Britt Eklund appear, as like well as the horror movie The Wicker Man. So it's actually kind of an interesting connection for them. And I think that both of them are really committed to delivering on the material they're given. Britt Eklund and Maud Adams go 110%, and they do exactly what they're asked of them. But I think the problem with this era of James Bond in general in relationship to the Bond girls is more Bond himself, right? Bond, who I actually enjoy this leaning with the Bond character, Bond is a jerk in the early Roger Moore movies. He is just absolutely kind of arrogant, condescending, dismissive, and it's very entertaining in a lot of regards. But in the relationships, it tends to diminish opportunities for a stronger character presence in the movie. So whereas you have a very strong villain, the Bond girl characters, in particular, Britt Eklund's Mary Goodnight, is kind of like the butt of comic jokes. Now, Maud Adams as make sure I get the alliteration here right. Andrea Anders is actually a pretty tragic character, and I think she's actually a very interesting character in the sense that she's the one who actually pulls Bond into the action in the story.
It's the cry for help. It's really that. Yeah.
Right. And there's no more Fleming-esque Bond trope than like the
winged dove.
The winged dove, right, trope that she's really pulling Bond into the story there. And I think she actually, of all the Bond girls, it's no surprise that she came back for Octopussy. Maud Adams has the best chemistry on screen with Roger Moore.
Yeah.
And so she's really great in this movie. And I think even when you get to the moment during the kickboxing scene where Bond and Scaramanga meet in the movie for the first time, her death actually has this kind of like weird, bittersweet, like sort of like melancholy to it. Yeah.
Especially because to me, I found that so striking because it seems like she's awake. It's almost like her death was really when she was awake. And when she was awake, it was her death. Right. Because she's living this tragic life. She had already died in a way. I mean, you could get very metaphysical about this. I get it.
You could, and I would happily do so. That is the kind of the Bond films have this weird way of being like very light entertainment with like these strangely very poetic images and moments, and that's one of them. And I think she's such an interesting, compelling character. The movie, if it does a disservice to her character, it's just that it just doesn't build on that enough. Like really, Maud Adams' character could be the primary Bond girl.
Come here, you're coming off screen.
Oh, I am so sorry.
They want to see you.
I'm so excited about the movie. I'm just kind of drifting off
Ryan
into the
is
ether.
used to working in a camera and himself. This is your first day working with like another person.
This is correct.
This is a big day.
It's a big day.
Is what we're saying. By the way, I agree with you with Mary Goodnight. You know what I do? So there is this whole thing with Bond girls, like Tiffany Case.
Sure.
Where I call it the Marcus Brody syndrome, where Marcus Brody in The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, is this really like together person in the first few films, and then they make him into a bumbling idiot.
Right.
And I feel like it's with Mary Goodnight. She is actually, and I remember her title, it's a liaison officer, which is all about creating intelligence. And she even finds out that the green Rolls Royces go back to this hotel, and she's very smart in this. And yeah, she's pining for Bond, but that's typical. And then towards like the latter half of the movie, they turned her into like bikini girl.
Yeah, it's unsatisfying because I think the actual satisfying pivot of that would be Bond is very skeptical of her capabilities from the outset. Roger Moore's Bond comes in very condescending and demeaning to Mary Goodnight in a way that he comes in hot. Essentially, he's just like he's bark and snark at her from the moment they meet, which would almost make it more satisfying if she proved to be increasingly competent as the movie comes in and actually kind of met his energy. And you get a little bit of that from the outset, right? You pointed out with the green Rolls Royce.
Absolutely.
Where Bond is like, you lost the lead. And she's like, no, I didn't. I know this. And unfortunately, by the time you get to the climax, she is setting off Scaramanga's laser with her behind and all kinds of like silly nonsense.
Although you could say that she had her comeuppance when she uses this wrench. And what's his name? Crag? What's the bad guy's name? I don't
even know. He's like the most anonymous henchman in that movie. But yes,
feel this. That's got some weight.
Well, you could do bicep.
You could. This is hashtag Bond Fitness Challenge. We have to talk about there is one thing in here that I noticed when I was watching this that I kept tapping my toe to, and it's the obvious one, and that is you've got John Barry's music, and you've got Lulu and that amazing song, but not everybody loves the music to this film for some reason. Talk to us about what that's about, but how do you feel about it?
So it's interesting. So I was reading an interview with John Barry, and John Barry is actually the one who was responsible for the infamous slide whistle during the Evel Knievel stunt. And he was talking about how he, at this point...
Wait. You mean that slide whistle?
That slide whistle.
Yeah.
And how he had reached a point where he was kind of thinking, you have to remember, John Barry had been doing Bond movies for a while. At this point, it was kind of like an old hat kind of thing, and
Yeah.
he was having fun with the concept, and it was just kind of a joke to him at this point. And he would pivot from that in subsequent movies to
Yeah.
something a little bit more serious and committed. I kind of enjoy it because I feel like his music for this movie, and even the song itself that he did with Lulu, is very much connected to the style of the movie on the whole. Like, it's very hard for me to envision or imagine this movie with any other sort of soundtrack. The sort of jaunty, quasi
Ragtimey almost.
ragtimey at
Yeah.
times, especially when they
Yeah. It's
yeah, it's
Right?
it's it feels like it's part of the energy of the movie. This is a movie where it's the sins of this movie are sins committed in the name of entertaining the audience. And I'm always willing to be
great way to put it.
forgiving of something like that. That's the same reason I love Moonraker. It's like Moonraker is a movie that is bending backwards to entertain the audience so far that it goes to outer space and beyond. And Moonraker and Man with the Golden Gun has a similar ethos in another kind of like direction. It's a little bit more grounded, but it's a little bit more like, and John Barry's committed to that. I feel like it has the same sweep that you would want from a John Barry score.
100%. And I've got to tell you, I mean, I'm wondering if you're talking about the secret sauce to this movie, which is for those of you that want to celebrate it like we do, or by the way, introduce it to individuals that have never seen it, you almost have to tell somebody to surrender yourself to the movie, to the fantasy of it, to the craziness of it, to not thinking about it, hear me out, as a reasonable person. You know, and that a part of the music is by the way, I love this music. I love everything about it. Even in the beginning when the hitman that Scaramanga wants to be tested by, you have all the different versions
Oh, sure.
of the music. I'm just having so much fun. I found myself going like this with it because I surrendered myself to just having fun. And in a way, and this is not, I promise we're not going to have like a whole diatribe of like No Time to Die, but in a way, I feel like some current Bond movies have lost some of what I call the fun factor. Not that it needs to be silly and campy, but just let's have fun.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think this movie, more so than even some of the other Roger Moore Bond movies, is such a great experience for having fun with James Bond.
Yes.
In every moment in this movie, James Bond seems like he's having fun,
Yes.
and we're having fun with James Bond alongside him as he explores such wonderful locations. I think one of the things that I really love about Golden Gun is just how much of the travelogue aspect of the Bond films is there, and some Bond fans very recently have been taking a trip abroad to
Yes.
explore Golden Gun locations, and
So
I'm
jealous.
so jealous because this movie makes me want to travel to every single location it shows, and it feels like it really invests in the locations, right down to the wreck of the Queen Elizabeth, right
Yes.
in the harbor.
I was just going to say, and they give such a wonderful, beautiful pan of it. And even when he escapes onto it at night, every shot seems to be loving it. It reminded me when I was watching those, and it was less about kind of the Orient, if you will, but more about the fact that the camera is in love with the location. And when it's in love with the location, you feel like you want to be there and you are there. You're a part of it.
Absolutely. And I that's something that as Bond has become more like globe hoppy has been lost a little bit. You get some like nice establishing shots and then it's into interior locations. And this is a movie that really feels like it was built around locations. They went out location scouting and they're like, we're going to build a sequence on the river here, and we're going to build a sequence at the kickboxing match here, and the floating casino here, and all these places are also just such a moment in time. It's a lost moment in time. That moment of that part of the world in the 1970s is never going to exist again. And even in the exaggerated, cartoonish lens of the Bond franchise, it's such a wonderful time capsule of a time and a place.
By the way, you nailed something again, as you do. A very important thing that occurred to me last night when I was watching this is that there are moments that are what I call historical nature. So some of the imagery, like even the bottoms up logo, is so simple, but it's such a 70s type of logo. You wouldn't find something like that as, iconic or iconographic as today. All throughout the movie, you're finding those. The plaid jacket that he has, the really kind of crazy jacket that he has on an island, by the way, which is always like 100 degrees, no matter what. You have that you wouldn't have today. So I do think it's a nice snapback. But we're dancing around a subject that has to be the cornerstone, if not the hub of our celebration, and that is Roger Moore. So I want to get your opinion because you had the freshman year of Live and Let Die with Roger Moore, and now you have his sophomore outing. How do you think he was as Bond?
So I have said this elsewhere, and I think this is true. I think Roger Moore is at his best in this movie, and I think he's at his best in Octopussy. And I think those are his two perfect
You're
Bond
going against the
performances.
grain here.
I think it's true. I think he's so good here. In Live and Let Die, you get the sense that he's great out of the gate. Roger Moore is a consummate professional in every single one of his Bond movies. Not a bum moment for
Right.
Roger Moore, really. But he's just so confident and assured from the moment he's walking into M's office. And he's this movie, for all you might say against it, with all of its flaws, it gives him such great material to play with his natural talent for comic timing. And not in the comic timing in the way of like, I'm driving a hovercraft gondola like you get in Moonraker, but like in comic timing in just bickering with people.
Yes.
And you get that from the outset. This movie calibrates MI6 so it just feels like everybody's overstressed coworkers together. Like Q is arguing with M is arguing with Bond,
Yeah.
M is continually telling Bond that he just wishes Bond would like get shot or something.
Yeah.
And everybody's arguing together, and it's such good material for Roger to play against. He is the funniest Bond by far,
Yeah.
and I think he gets
Mankiewicz and the writers nailed it on this one. And by the way, one of the things that I was celebrating with Roger Moore, which you've hinted at, is everybody says Roger Moore is great at the one-liners, but I would actually argue and say it's the nonverbal cues. It's the thing in Q Branch where, he kind of makes the eyebrow and he rolls his eyes. All I did last night is I said, something, I'm not going to focus on the characters talking. I'm only going to focus on Roger Moore when he's in frame. And I saw so many nonverbal moments that were projecting his persona, the film, the plot, and it added so much dimensionality. And for those that say he's campy and slapstick and one-dimensional and one-liners, I would fence with them and say, watch him in this movie, but just watch him. Like, don't watch the props, don't watch the gadgets, don't even listen to the music, but watch him. He is an amazing, what I call projection actor, where all of his tutelage on stage, as a TV actor, all the things that had to take up the view when there wasn't a lot of money, he's bringing it there, and he owned it.
I completely agree. And you could argue more so than any other Bond, Roger Moore's face is always worth watching when he's in frame. He is always giving 110% of any moment he's connecting with his fellow actors.
Agreed.
And the moment you highlighted, that moment where he's in Q Branch arguing with Q and whoever Q's assistant is about like the location of the gold bullet and like trying to figure that out. Lazar?
I can go.
And like what's a Lazar? Like that
5% nickel?
yeah, like that whole sequence, you just see Roger Moore's gift as an actor just for always showing up no matter what he's doing in the scene, and also his generosity for his fellow performers.
Yeah.
He is a continually volleying with those around him. There's no sense of like him just doing something and leaving nobody, like anybody, anything to go with. He is in the scene 100%. He's honestly, Roger Moore is I've come to realize this.
Oh.
So like,
I hear a confession coming.
Timothy Dalton is in some ways my favorite Bond, but Roger Moore is the Bond I enjoy watching the most. And
That's a great point. When you're feeling a little low and you need a pickup, Roger Moore is the pickup.
He is the pickup.
Yeah.
He is the pickup. And it's just because he's always having the most fun in his movies. You can always see that in every scene. But B, I just enjoy that his Bond always feels that he's the smartest guy in the room. And he's always like, in any situation, he's so pleased to just outsmart people,
Absolutely.
and that's the way his character is kind of defined. Is like he's going to be the Bond who's like, you can't tell him he can go. You're going to tell him he can't go into high fats territory, but he's going to figure out how to go into high fats.
Yeah,
Like
and even
base.
the interaction with Chew Me, you're like, oh my gosh. Well, you've hit upon something because I think a lot of people watch Daniel Craig and they also even watch Timothy Dalton. They go, that's badass Bond. I wish I could be as badass as that. But with Roger Moore, you wish that you could say the things and do the things that he's doing. You wish you could get away with the things he's doing and saying. And that in and of itself is its own special moment. So we have to do something because you hinted at the whole idea of a moment in time. This is a capture, if you will. It's a time capsule that we love to open and Bond. And one thing I noticed in watching this again is that Bond always likes to stay current, right? It likes to be, science fact, not science fiction, because it likes to stay with a little bit of tiny ribbon of reality of today. What I think it did really well was it focused a little bit of eyeball on the energy crisis. It even said, like, Bond's like, the energy crisis is still current to M when he's taken off of the case. And the whole thing of like the man with the golden gun and harnessing the sun, it's all about energy and the energy crisis. But they don't whack you over the head. And I feel like today, and yes, I'm sorry, it's my channel, here comes a personal moment. I feel like there are so many movies today that if they have a social discussion to talk about or an agenda, they take the bat, they wrap it in barbed wire, and they go whack, whack, and they whack the audience over the head, where this was woven like sinew in the fun. But what do you think about the energy crisis, the history, and maybe even commentary?
Well,
Now I just opened it up for him.
you opened it up because the first thing that comes to mind is like, what, you don't like comparisons between how James Bond is better than like drone warfare or something like that, Inspector. But I do agree, actually. I think that's the kind of color of the time that I enjoy in these movies.
Yeah.
And there were moments in the franchise's history where they kind of backed away from that. Like famously, Tomorrow Never Dies originally being story focused on the Hong Kong handover.
Yes, yeah.
And they decided to pivot from that late in development just because they thought it wouldn't be current. And I think that kind of thing is actually really interesting to come back to years later and actually has aged pretty well. Not just because the energy crisis has been, mostly for the worse, a kind of like recurrent topic in society, but it's also kind of just matter of fact. I think the stories that take these details are nice when they treat the spy professionals as just spy professionals doing a job. And this is
Yeah.
just the particular nature of an assignment.
That's a good way to put
And
it.
your assignment is to solve today's problem, and today's problem is the solar crisis, and we need the device to solve the solar crisis. Go out and do it. And I think when you start to get into like, well, here's the ethical ramifications of this, you start to like go into realms of reality and like moral reasoning that the series is not designed to support. That's not what Bond is about. Bond is a blunt instrument who is executing on an assignment. And when you keep those details as just kind of like context, in some ways they almost kind of carry weight unto themselves. So like
They
the
do.
solar crisis is kind of a nice snapshot of a moment in time where that was a hot topic, where that was driving a lot of conversation at the time, and doesn't feel like it distracts from the story.
No.
It's just kind of baked into what's going on there, and supplies a pretty reasonable threat. I like the. I think you could maybe argue, and I have argued, that like the solar plot doesn't line up perfectly nicely with Scaramanga's own modus operandi as an assassin.
Yeah.
But I think once you get to the island at the end and he's shooting a laser and destroying a plane on the beach, like it's such quintessentially Bondian stuff.
He really is the man with the golden gun. I mean,
Exactly.
that line in and of itself wraps it all together. All right, here's what we're going to do in the last few minutes of this, because again, celebration, and you could tell these are two Bond fans that absolutely adore the film, love to revisit it in this 50th year. Look at the screen, look at all those people out there. Give a short little notation of why on earth either they should revisit The Man with the Golden Gun, or maybe somebody that hasn't even watched the film, why should they watch it? This is your summation moment.
He's putting me on the spot here.
Hell
now,
yes!
Now I have to distill everything.
We don't prepare anything here.
Into a sentence. I would say this is the ultimate lazy Saturday afternoon Bond movie.
I like that.
Which is, you're not looking for anything to change your world, but you're looking to just kind of escape for a few hours, have a great time with Roger Moore at the peak of his powers, Christopher Lee at the peak of his powers, going through having a cat and mouse game through some of the most vividly captured locations in the Bond franchise. It's fun, and that's all you need to know.
I love that. I love that. By the way, his was much better than what mine's going to be. Mine is going to be very succinct, but there are a lot of things in this world that make us frown. A lot, maybe even too many. There's a lot of politics, religion, etc. If you want to remove yourself for 2 hours and 5 minutes and smile for 2 hours and 5 minutes, this is the Bond film for you. If you need a frown that needs to be turned upside down, to use the old cliche, this is the film for you for all these reasons that we've highlighted. So my friend, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for letting me celebrate. Look at this. We got Safari jackets on. Amazing. We've got Ryan from Analyze This, Mr. Bond. Go check out his channel. And of course, David Zritsky for the Bond Experience. Go out and celebrate the man with the golden gun. We'll see you real soon. Take care. Thanks for watching this episode. If you want to be up on the latest from the Bond Experience, just click on this subscribe and subscribe to our channel. You're going to get all the latest and greatest information, plus some exclusive content. And by the way, speaking of content, here's something especially for you, just because we know you. Talk to you soon.